Sure. So William Hess, I have spent most of my professional career in Asia and China specifically. And so that started off as a coin toss in university about whether to study Japanese or Chinese. I had no great vision of how the world would change or about what would happen to the Japanese economy at the time. It was just a fortuitous event for me that has led to a career focused on the Chinese economy and political economy. So currently working out of New York, but again, I've spent most of my professional career in Asia. And PRC Macro is a macro political advisory firm, and so we combine the two, which is, I think, a bit different from many of our peers, where we spend a lot of time trying to understand how politics work in China, how policy is actually made, and then trying to read that through into macro and market outcomes for our clients. So we have our team in Beijing, a team in New York, and try to keep our clients abreast of really what's coming out of China, how it's going to impact global markets, and make sure that they're not making the wrong investment decisions based on misunderstanding of politics and policy in China, because those are areas where many people don't want to tread, but for our clients only, we do provide our views about how that's all evolving and how that will impact their portfolios. Well, it's interesting that although the regulators in China like to speak about being a big data-driven society and economy, I think for markets and for a lot of people looking at the economy, it's becoming an increasingly small data economy, meaning that the series available to people like us are becoming fewer and fewer, while at the same time big data available to the government is boundless. So I think that's creating even more of a black box where it comes to the way that people understand how China works. And so for us, it's really an opportunity in trying to interpret, the policy signals, how they're interpreting what's happening in the economy. And so that's become a pretty key part of our business, not just to do conventional macroeconomics and forecasting, but also to tie in a lot of the qualitative aspects to give people context to understand what's happening. Generically, I would say that we're trying to help them get the China call right. So many times we've seen people lose a lot of money based on misunderstanding of policy signals, specifically on the currency, for commodities related to the real estate sector. So really trying to have an accurate read on what's happening on the policy front and read that through 18 months into the future and see how markets may or may not have processed those signals properly. I think we combined a unique set of experiences and perspectives. So for me, I've spent most of my professional life in China. Our co-founder spent most of his professional life up until a few years ago in the U.S. So I think he's from China originally. So I think we have a unique blend of experience and perspective so when that all comes together in our research product, that we're not afraid to be critical of either system, and then coming at both the U.S. economy and the Chinese economy with those experiences, I think that gives us a good starting place to understand the dynamics which aren't really captured well in a lot of the analysis out there, or especially in the data. Well, I think it's interesting for many of our clients, they're macro-focused funds, so a lot of the macro space is actually contracting, in part because there seems to be a lot of correlation of assets that shouldn't be correlated, because people are maybe even be running different strategies, but they're coming up with the same investment options. So there seems to be this gradual snowball of correlation across asset classes, which I think is very relevant to how our business is going to change, simply because China will be the source of some of the kind of regime change, which may change those correlations in the future. So, maybe as a consequence from big data and from the expansion of quantitative investment strategies, that people are really being directed into the same area. Similar in many ways to the way that you see algorithms in social media directing people to the same kind of information that leads to people thinking about the same thing about various topics. And so that kind of convergence is evident in markets as well. So for us, we're always looking out for what's going to change the regime. So China is certainly large enough at this point to be that kind of the source of regime change. And so for us, it's trying to look at how everything's become very concentrated and correlated to a world where China may introduce some changes coming up with respect to currencies, with their own outbound investment, for example, which markets will be forced to adjust in that case. Well, I think our vision for the future is to take our base of institutional research and broaden that into more direct asset management and leverage the framework that we've developed and the base that we've developed to move into maybe derivative business opportunities. So for us, that maybe sends us more in a direction that's converging with some of our clients, but I think working with them more closely on our own investment calls and our own portfolios related to China will be a natural evolution of our business, which has been research focused, but increasingly we're moving into other areas where we can better apply our own outputs. I think objectivity is always difficult. Certainly for China, there are a number of problems with China. Information availability is one. There's also a lot, I think, of intellectual baggage that people bring to analyzing a country. For me, as a Westerner looking at something that's such a different system, I think maintaining objectivity and being open to understanding how a different system might work in ways that you wouldn't necessarily appreciate applying the wrong model. So if you want to look at China from the lens of a Western liberal democracy, it's never ever going to work. And so that has to apply also to the way that you understand how the economy functions and how markets are functioning. So I think keeping an open mind, being objective, and being willing to accept that there are alternative possibilities for the way that things will evolve, I think is really key to looking at a place so dynamic and complex as China is. I'm a Mandarin speaker. I work in Mandarin, so we spend a lot of time working with policy documents and what statements coming out of a government which to some may look very bland and very boring. To us, the language still matters quite a great deal. So that's the key source of where we find signals and language changes in the policy documents, anything to give us ideas about how policy will change, how resource flows will change as a result of that. So policy still leads everything in China. So being one of our advantages, I think, is being able to really interpret the minutiae and the details in those policy documents and then reading that through into how things are going to evolve. So that's maybe not very exciting to people outside of our business, but to us, it's still a very kind of fertile source of information and signals to try and drive our research process. We don't work very much with onshore institutional investors in China, but we find that dealing with the entities that we've worked with over many years, that they are have always been very open to adopting new models and new sources of information. So for us, we've kind of watched the financial industry evolve in China over time. So in some ways, there's a lot of divergence where you see some of the leaders in their various business really start to bring in a lot of external practices and management especially. Then there are the others who I think are maybe are a bit more stagnant, where they're not really evolving, but at the same time, you are seeing a generation of very dynamic bankers and fund managers onshore in China, and then now coming offshore into global markets as they mature. So that's something that's been interesting to see over the span of the past couple decades, where starting from a very kind of a simple starting point has evolved very quickly to produce some very talented managers and some very funds that are on the cutting edge of what they're doing. I think the first is the importance, as I mentioned, of objectivity and keeping an open mind about alternative outcomes. That's something that we stress to all of our clients. And so looking ahead, many of our clients are focused on very short-term investment strategies and themes, but there are some things underway that we think are going to be very important over the span of, say, 5 to 10 years. So although that in terms of rate of change, they may not start very large, they may not change very quickly at the beginning, but we think the seeds are there for some very significant changes to the way that China interacts with the world, especially with relationships with the US dollar, with China's Belt and Road Initiative. This all kind of converges, ultimately, we think, in kind of an alternative currency system which China will push globally. And so that'll be a very large source of change for the global investment and payment systems over the next 5 to 10 years. So the pieces are falling into place. So that's the kind of thing that we'd look for on a very long time horizon for our clients to see where the starting point to enter that trade might be.